Mr. Yu Jibin, Professor and Doctoral Supervisor of the National Institute of Emergency Management, the Party School of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, greetings. I thank the China Society of Emergency Management for the invitation to join the Emergency Management Subforum. We are witnessing worrisome increase in the frequency and severity of disasters. This year alone, we have seen wildfires and floods causing enormous damage and economic losses around the world, including here in China. The average annual direct economic loss from disasters is expected to have increased from $70 billion in the 1990s to $170 billion in the 2010s. If current trends continue, the number of disasters could increase to 560 per year by 2030. The United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, recently said during the third Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation that, and I quote, "Humanity is badly losing the race against climate change, which is running faster than we are. And the world's most vulnerable people, communities, countries are paying the highest price." End of quote. At the midpoint of the implementation of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030, as well as the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Sustainable Development Goals, it is crucial for us to take stock of the progress made while acknowledging the challenges ahead. The report for the midterm review of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction pointed out that, and I quote, "It is highly unlikely we will meet the Sendai Framework goals by 2030 given current trends in disaster risk reduction and the limited progress meeting other global agreements such as the Sustainable Development Goals, the climate and biodiversity targets." End of quote. That is why we must work together to strengthen exchanges and cooperation in disaster emergency management and tackle the climate crisis to prevent and mitigate such disasters. At the Climate Ambition Summit in September 2023 in New York, the United Nations Secretary General proposed an acceleration agenda calling on governments to hit fast forward on climate action. He has proposed the Climate Solidarity Pact, which calls on major emitters who have benefited from fossil fuels to make extra efforts to cut emissions and on wealthy countries to support emerging economies to do so. Innovation and cooperation are essential to the effective management and mitigation of disasters. During the earthquakes this year in Turkey and Syria, we witnessed that it is possible when nations put aside their differences to work together and save lives. But we need further action through enhanced political will, public policy, financing, and partnerships to operationalize our internationally agreed commitments and mechanisms such as the Sendai Framework, the Paris Agreement, and the outcomes of the Climate Ambition Summit. On political will, at the Conference of Parties COP27, the world reached a breakthrough agreement on a loss and damage fund for vulnerable countries. However, member states still need to ramp up their climate ambition and take concrete steps to operationalize the loss and damage fund as soon as possible. From now towards the Conference of Parties COP28, we count on major powers, including China, to support the operationalization of the loss and damage fund. We acknowledge China's progress in developing renewable energy, including electric vehicles. Still, China can do better, and we expect China to play a leadership role by pushing forward the timelines of the 30-60 goals on carbon peaking and carbon neutrality. This can help lead the way in working with other countries to reduce potential losses in lives and livelihoods. Additionally, China's infrastructure projects in other countries should align with the international agreements for reducing global disaster risk and losses with infrastructure that fits the needs of the 21st century and is green, sustainable, and inclusive. On public policy, without country-tailored public policy and financial commitments, the transition from fossil fuels to renewables will not be successful or sustainable. At the Climate Ambition Summit, leaders expressed their full support for the Secretary General's Early Warning System for All initiative by ensuring universal early warning systems coverage by 2027 or earlier through accelerated investments in adaptation and early warning systems to save lives and protect livelihoods. We must translate these commitments into functional policy with a clear timetable and financial instruments. The UN can support capacity building for countries in need, including formulating and implementing transition plans, regulatory support for a just and equitable transition so as to accelerate progress towards a net zero target. On financing, the current international financial architecture was created after the Second World War and is no longer fit for purpose for the 21st century. The UN Secretary General has called on the overhaul of the current system to reflect the world economy of today and not of 1945. Multilateral development banks have committed to work together in support of the Early Warnings for All initiative and the Green Climate Fund. We need to urgently accelerate investments in adaptation and early warning systems to save lives, protect livelihoods, deliver climate finance at scale, including through the mobilization of private finance. On partnerships, governments play a key role on reducing barriers to lowering greenhouse gas emissions through public funding, sending clear signals to investors, and scaling up tried and tested policy measures. But partnerships in disaster risk reduction require broad-based partnerships to provide capacity building, much-needed financial resources for developing countries through South-South cooperation and other mechanisms. We need an all-of-society approach, including the private sector, academia, civil society, to leverage their much-needed resources and innovations. The United Nations in China has collaborated extensively with our counterparts in China in disaster risk reduction. We remain committed to providing our platforms, networks, and expertise in supporting China's national disaster risk reduction efforts and collaborating with China to share its experience and best practices on disaster risk reduction with other countries in need. I call on all present today to be the first movers and actors in such efforts. I wish today's forum every success. Thank you very much. 谢谢。